Alright guys, welcome to the second video on files. We're going to continue what we were talking about earlier and discuss more about files. So file names and file objects, what we're going to talk about to begin with. So file name extensions. So if you're a Windows person, depending on what depending on how you have your Explorer set up, you could see or you cannot see file extensions. But you should be aware that every file in Windows and Macs too for the most part these days have what's called a file extension. So file extension is a short sequence of characters that appear at the end of a file name preceded by a period. So for example, if you have a text file, it'll be, whatever my file is, .txt, and the extension indicates the type of data stored in the file. So you guys notice that when we store our Python files, it's something 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 .py. That indicates that this is a file that contains a Python program. Every file has a file extension, whether you can see that or not. So let's say, for example, here I have this set of videos, and these videos, you see they don't have a file extension, right? But if I click View, and then I click, what is it? Options. Then I can change the view, and I can scroll down here. And alright, so see this little checkbox that says hide file extensions for known types. If I uncheck this and I hit apply, you'll see that all of these things change to .mkv, which is like a movie container format. So these always had the MKV file extension, which indicates, like I said, they're a movie format. But in the past, but Windows hides this from you because you don't necessarily need to know this. What Windows uses this for is so that it knows what to open something with. So example, this is an MKV. It's a file you see a movie preview. If I edit this, rename, and I change it, see it doesn't by default want me to do this, but if I change it to a TXT, then it's going to give me a warning and say you shouldn't do this. It's going to make your file unusable because now it's not going to open with a movie player anymore. We're going to open it with Notepad. So if we open it with Notepad, we see trash because this is a binary file. We can't actually open it as text. I don't know what Windows will do if I double click it. Yeah, see if I double click it now, it tries to open it with WordPad, which is no bueno because it's huge, A and B, it's all in binary. So WordPad doesn't know what to do with it. It's going to display a bunch of trash. But because I changed the file extension, it is going to change what opens that file when I click it. So this is true in Windows. This is true in Mac OS too. Let's rename this back to .mkv. So the one thing that you need to be aware about with file extensions is a lot of times people will think, well, I want to change the file extensions. I'm just going to do that. And they'll have file extensions turned off. And they'll right click on this thing and they'll go rename. And they'll say, oh, this should be a text file. And they'll say .txt. And that is not correct. And the reason is that if you don't have file name extensions turned on, then you actually can't edit the file name extensions. And so what you've done now is you've made a file called whatever .txt .mkv, because with file name extensions turned off, you cannot actually edit the file extension. Okay? So file extensions are not required. You can actually store anything in a file no matter what the extension is. You can even have files that don't have an extension. It actually doesn't matter. These are hints to Windows to tell it what to use to open the file. And there's a bunch of programs that are registered with this in Windows. But the file extensions, in reality, they don't matter. They're just an operating specific thing. And things like Linux, Unix, a lot of times they don't even have file extensions for things, or it's just a naming convention. Alright, so that's what file extensions are. So let's talk about file objects. So file objects are an object associated with a specific file. So what this does is it provides a way for the program to work with the file. So the file object is referenced by a variable. So we have a file that's on the disk, right? And we want to open that file. How do we open that file? So what we have to do is we have to create a data structure, a variable, that's associated with that file that we use to read from that file. So there's a file, it's an object. We haven't talked about objects yet. We will in a couple of weeks. But a file object is an object that's associated with a file. So once you open a file, you create your file object and open the file, you can use that object to read and write to the file. Okay, so there's a variable in memory that must be associated with the file, and the way you associate it with the file, we'll look at it in a second, is you use this open method. But what you're doing is you're creating a variable that's associated with that file, and then if you want to access that file, you read and write using that variable. So you don't use the file name except to associate the variable with the file that you want to use, but you don't use the file name directly. You use a variable that you associate with that file, and that's the variable that you use to read and write to your file. So here's an example. We have a file object. We have a variable name, which points to, of course, our file object, and that file object is associated with this file on disk. So we don't use the name of the file specifically, right? We only use the name of the file when we open the file. We say we open the file, which just means we create a variable and we associate it with that file name on disk. From then on, we use the variable. We don't use the file name at all. Okay? Alright, so opening a file, like I was just talking about, we use an open function. And what this does is it creates a file object and associates it with a file on the disk. So the general format for this is we're going to have a variable name, whatever our variable is going to be, you know, file object, file, whatever, file 1, file 2, whatever you want to call your variable, equals open, and then we use the file name, which is a string, which is the name of the file on the disk, right? And it needs to be, well, it needs to be the full name, including the extension, generally speaking. All right, so again, when you're looking at your files on your disk, you may not see the extension, but you need to be aware that there is an extension. So let's say you have a file called, you know, pet names, and you look at your disk and it says pet names, and there's no file extension. You double click it, it opens in WordPad. That is a .text file. You need to turn on when you're programming. Again, you need to go back in the video, look at how I turned on file name extensions in Windows. You need to turn that on. If you don't turn that on, you're going to have a lot of trouble with files in Python, because you need to be able to see what those names are. Okay, so make sure you go back, you turn that stuff on. So the second parameter of this open function is the mode. So the mode is a string specifying what we're going to do with the file. For example, we could only read the file. We could only write to the file. Or if we write, we can read at the same time. But we can also append to the file. Append to the file means adding to the end of the file, right? So we have 3 modes: read, write, and append. There's some more modes. We'll talk about those maybe later. But read, write, and append. So I'm reading the file in because I'm going to do something with it. If I want to write to the file, I need to put the W string in. And if I'm going to append to the file, I use the A string, right? So that's it for this video. I will make a third video and cover files a little bit more.